Assalamu alaikum rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. Inshallah, everyone out there is doing well. Uh, I wanted to just go ahead and get started, inshallah ta'ala. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. والصلاة والسلام على سيد المرسلين محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه الطيبين الطاهرين. I bear witness that no one deserves to be worshipped except Allah Ta'ala, the one who has no partner and no similar, the one who has no length and no width and no depth and no perimeter, the one who is not a volume and is not in a place. And how could he be in a place when he existed before time and space? He speaks without sound or letter, not Arabic, Hebrew, nor Korean. He's not light. He's not a soul. He has nothing in common with human beings. He's not in the direction of up, down, right, left, front, nor back. And whatever you imagine in your mind, Allah is different than that. And I bear witness that our noble, unrivaled master, Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, is the slave of Allah, his final messenger, and the best of all of God's creations. May Allah unite us with him in paradise and grant us a drink from his basin. And as always, I ask that Allah grant to me and to all of you sincere intentions. Ameen. Lillahi ta'ala. So we're going through this book, the 7 Hadeeth, obligatory knowledge that every Muslim must know. And we've made it to the section that deals with the invalidators of Salat. So in this book is page 21. Page 21. So we've already talked quite a bit about the Salat. We talked about the conditions of the Salat. And now, alhamdulillah, we finished talking about the integrals of the Salat as well as the additional conditions for rewardability of the Salat. So now we'd like to begin talking about the invalidators. What are the things that if you do it in the Salat, it will render your Salat invalid? It means your Salat will not count. It'll be as if you did not make Salat because what you did was invalid. It says one Salat is invalidated if any of the following occur. So just to be clear, this list of things that invalidate Salat, it is not an exhaustive list. There may be things that also invalidate Salat that are not listed here. Okay, and in fact, for sure, there are some things that are not listed here, but most of those other things are kind of like technical things. These things here will be enough for most people. So what are these things that you need to avoid in the Salat? The first one, it says, uttering 2 letters, or even 1 letter if it has a meaning, unless one forgets and it is little. So the first thing that invalidates one's Salat, meaning the first of the actions we're going to mention here, which if done while in Salat, it immediately renders your Salat invalid, is speaking. Now, when we say speaking invalidates the Salat, we mean speaking with the speech of people. Speaking with the speech of people. It means the kind of speech that one person would say to someone else. That is the sort of speech that breaks the Salat. Okay, it does not break Salat if you recite the Fatiha. It does not break Salat if you recite Quran. It does not break Salat if you do dhikrs and du'as. You know, if you say Sami Allahu liman hamida, if you say Allahu Akbar, if you say things of that sort, Subhana Rabbiyal A'la. These things do not break the Salat because this is not considered to be speech of people. This is not the kind of speech that's used between one person and another person. Rather, this is speech that's used when a person is speaking to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that speech does not invalidate the Salat. Even if you were to speak in Arabic, a dua, which was not passed down to us from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, still, this will not invalidate the Salat because it's dua. You're speaking to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay, that's the first thing I want to make clear. The speech which invalidates the Salat is the kind of speech that's between people, not the kind of speech that the human or the slave makes to Allah. Then there's a certain amount of speech that invalidates. How much? 2 Arabic letters. 2 Arabic letters. And I remind you that the vowels or the short vowels are not written in Arabic. Okay, so two Arabic letters, uh, what it means is you said something that in order to write that sound in Arabic, it would require writing two actual letters, not counting harakas, those unwritten symbols. We mean it would require two letters in the Arabic alphabet to write whatever that sound was that you made. Okay, notice that I described it as a sound. So that means even if these two Arabic letters do not make a word, even if they don't have any meaning at all, the mere fact that it's two letters long is enough to invalidate your salat. It says, or even one letter if it has a meaning. So there are cases where one letter even will invalidate your salat. And that's the case where the one letter has a meaning. There are some one-letter words in the Arabic language, such as qi. The word qi is an order to protect something. This word in Arabic is just the letter qaf. That's it. This letter qaf has a kesra on it, which is unwritten, but the word is a single letter long. This is an example of a one-letter word that has a meaning. So if the person says in his salat, this one-letter Arabic word that has a meaning, then this also will invalidate his salat. Again, just to repeat, we're not talking about things that were said to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We're talking about the speech, which is the sort of speech that is used between people. Then it says, unless one forgets and it is little. So that means there's an exception to this rule. There are cases when a person might speak in salat with the speech of people and his salat will not be invalidated. There are cases like that. What's the case? It says he forgot. What does forgot mean? It means he forgot he was in salat. Sometimes you're standing there like this, and then you lose concentration and you just completely forget that you're into prayer. You just feel like you're standing there for some reason and you might say something. Well, if you forgot that you were in salat, then in that case, your speech will not invalidate the salat on the condition that what you said was a small amount of speech. A small amount. We're not talking about you gave an entire, speech. Okay, what we mean is you spoke something that's like 6 short, simple sentences or less. For example, let's say a person forgot they were in salat. So, he said to his son, hey, run to the store, buy me a cup of bread, buy me a loaf of bread, put it in there in the kitchen. Okay, that is considered to be a small amount of speech. If a person said that to his son while he was in salat, but he forgot that he was in salat, then this would not invalidate the salat. When he remembers that he's in salat, he just stops talking and continues. There's another thing that's important to mention here, and that is that if a person knows that it's haram to speak while you're in the salat, then if he speaks, his salat is broken. Okay, if he intentionally speaks with 2 letters or more, then his salat is broken, or even 1 letter that has a meaning. This is true even if the person who knows that it's haram to speak in the salat, even if he does not know that it breaks the salat. Okay, there might be a person who knows that it's haram to speak in the salat, but he does not know that speaking will invalidate the salat. This person, if he speaks in the salat, his salat will be invalidated. Why? Because he knew it was haram to do. And knowing that it's haram is sufficient for him to know not to do it. So the fact that he did not know it breaks the salat does not save him. He had enough knowledge to know not to talk because he knew it was haram. Okay? Whereas a person who did not know it was haram to speak in the salat, this person, if he speaks in the salat, it will not invalidate the salat. Again, on the condition that it was a small amount. MashaAllah. Number 2, What's the second invalidator? It says performing many moves. Performing many moves. So one of the things that invalidates the salat is if a person does a lot of movements in his salat that are not actually part of the salat. Movements that are not part of the salat, nor recommended in the salat, just extra movements. If a person does a lot of them, this will invalidate the salat. But what counts as a lot? What counts as a lot? It says, which, according to some scholars, are 3 consecutive moves. So some scholars of the Shafi'i school, they said that any 3 consecutive unnecessary movements counts as a lot of extra movement, and that will invalidate the salat. This is the extremely famous opinion in the Shafi'i school, and the majority of scholars consider it to be the strongest opinion of the school, that 3 consecutive movements invalidates the salat. It says, according to others, it is moving for the duration of 1 rak'ah. So there's another opinion, which is also very strong and also able to be followed. So you can follow this other opinion if you choose. But there's another opinion that says that your salat is not invalidated unless the number of consecutive unnecessary movements that you make are so many that the time that you spent making those unnecessary movements was enough time for someone to complete 1 whole rak'ah of the salat. So if you do a rak'ah's worth of extra movements, only then is your salat invalidated. This opinion is considerably easier than the famous opinion. They're both very strong, mashallah, and you're free to follow either one. Number 3, performing an excessive move. Performing an excessive move. What's an excessive move? Like something that's, excessive. Like if someone just in the middle of salat just jumped as high as they possibly can, or jumped forward like a standing broad jump. This is an excessive move. Okay, this is not like, something like that will just break the salat right away. Number 4, adding an extra integral of action. Okay, so we've learned the integrals now, and we know that some of those integrals are things that you say, like the takbir, the fatiha, the tahiyyat, the salat ala nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam, the closing taslim. These are things that you say. But there are other integrals of salat that are action integrals. You move, like qiyam, ruku', i'tidal, sujood, julus. These things are integrals of action. And if a person intentionally adds an integral of action to the salat, that invalidates the salat. That invalidates the salat. When we say intentionally, we mean that he remembers that he's in salat and he remembers where he is in the salat. Okay, we're not talking about the case where someone lost count of how many rak'ahs he did. So he did an extra rak'ah just to make sure he reached the total he needs to reach, like 4 or 3 or 2 even. If a person prays an extra rak'ah just to make sure that he did 4 rak'ahs, he knows there's a chance he did 5, but he needed to make sure he did 4. In this case, we don't say doing the extra movements invalidated the salat. Okay, let's say that in reality he prayed 5 rak'ahs. We don't say he invalidated the salat for doing extra movements, because in this case, it's not considered to be intentional. He forgot. Okay, he lost his place in the salat. No, the thing that invalidates the salat is if you intentionally add an extra rak'ah of action. Okay, you know that you're in salat. You haven't forgotten that you're in salat, and you know where you are in the salat. You haven't forgotten that either. You just decided to do something extra. Like if you're praying Asr and you decide to do 2 ruku's in one of the rak'ahs. Okay, that's adding extra movements. That invalidates the salat. Number 5, performing one move with the purpose of playing. So among the things that invalidates the salat is for a person to do one movement, even if it's a small movement. It doesn't have to be an excessive movement. If a person does one movement with the purpose of playing, okay? So like, for example, if a person is in salat and he sticks his tongue out at, someone else in the salat, or sticks his tongue out at a kid that's walking around, that's playing, okay? If you do that with the intention of playing, your salat is invalid, okay? Even if the movement was a small movement, nothing excessive, even if it was just one movement, not 3 in a row, or a whole rak'ah of movements, it doesn't matter. In this case, what matters is the intention. This person had the intention of playing when he did that movement, and playing is incompatible with salat. It's incompatible with it. So your salat is over immediately once the intention of playing is present. Number 6, eating or drinking. So among the things that invalidates the salat is for a person to eat while in the salat or drink while in the salat. It doesn't matter how small this thing is that you ate or drank. So if you had a piece of broccoli stuck between your teeth and in the salat you swallowed that little piece down, your salat is not broken. Any amount of eating or drinking will invalidate the salat. It says, except if one forgets, and it is little. So there's an exception to this rule, and that is if you forgot that you were in salat. If you forgot you were in salat and you ate something, well then it would be excused on the condition that it was a small amount. Number 7, intending to interrupt prayer. So among the things that invalidates the salat is if the one who's making salat intends to break the salat. So the intention of ending salat does end the salat. So your salat is over and invalid at that moment. Okay, even if the person intends, like his intention right now is to break the salat in the future, it still invalidates the salat right now. Like say the person is in the second rak'ah. Okay, he's in the second rak'ah and he decides that in the third rak'ah he's going to intend to break the salat. Okay, well then right now in the second rak'ah his salat is broken. This is because his intention is not firm. For your salat to be valid, you need to have a firm intention for the duration of the salat. Okay, if the intention does not become firm, then the salat is invalid. Number 8, making an intention to interrupt the prayer contingent on the occurrence of an incident. Okay, so like what if somebody, instead of intending to break the salat right now, or even intending to do it in the future, he makes it like a conditional. He puts an if on it. Like imagine if someone is in salat and he says, if someone knocks on the door, I'll break salat to go answer it. Okay, here he's not intending to break salat, but he's making breaking the salat conditional upon something. As if, like, if something happens, then I'll break the salat. In this case, his salat is broken immediately. As soon as he decides that if such and such happens, he'll break salat, his salat is broken already, even if the such and such never happens. And again, the reason is because his intention to remain in salat is not firm. Number 9, hesitating about interrupting the prayer. What do we mean by hesitating? We mean like waffling back and forth, not making up your mind about it. Okay, it's like the person is sitting there thinking, should I stay in salat or should I break salat? I'm going to stay in, or maybe I'll break it. He can't make up his mind one way or the other. This also invalidates the salat. Okay, this invalidates the salat. And again, this one and the couple before it, they all go back to the same root cause, which is that the person's intention is not firm. And that is the reason why the salat gets broken. Now, I want to caution you about something. We're talking about an actual intention here. Okay, we're not talking about just like a thought that might come to one's mind. Okay, sometimes while you're in Salat, the thought might pop in your head that you should break Salat. Well, if the thought just pops in and you ignore it, then your Salat is still good. Okay, that will not break the Salat, the mere thought coming into your head. No. But if that thought comes into your head, and because of that thought, you started really considering breaking the Salat, well, then your Salat will be broken because your intention is no longer firm. Number 10, the last thing in this list of invalidators, it says completing an integral while doubt persists regarding one's intention. So if a person completes any of the integrals of Salat with a doubt about whether his intention is valid, then this will invalidate the Salat. Okay, and again, this all goes back to the firm intention, the requirement that one's intention be firm. Okay, so if you have doubt as to whether your intention is even valid, then whichever integral you performed with that doubt, that integral will not be valid. And since the integral is not valid, the Salat is not valid. It says, or the opening saying of Allahu Akbar, taharrum. Okay, so just like how performing one integral while doubting about your intention invalidates the Salat, it's also the case that performing one integral while doubting whether you pronounce the opening Allahu Akbar correctly, that will also invalidate your Salat. Okay, so you can't have doubt about saying Allahu Akbar, which needs to be pronounced correctly in order for your Salat to begin. And you can't have doubt about your intention, which needs to be correct in order for your Salat to begin. It says, or doubting for a long time about this intention. So just like how it will invalidate your Salat if you complete one integral while doubting about the intention or doubting about the opening takbir, it is also the case that even if you did not complete one integral, but if the doubt persisted for a very long time, even if you did not do an integral, then that long persistence of doubt will also invalidate the Salat, whether it's doubt about your intention or doubt about the opening takbir. An extended period of doubt invalidates the Salat. These are things that you need to be firm about, inshallah. Let's continue. So after completing the section about invalidators of Salat, we move to the next section, section 4D, which is about congregational Salat. What is congregational Salat? Congregational Salat is when you pray in a group. That means there's more than one person making Salat together. Okay, when this happens, this is called congregational Salat. And when you're doing a congregational Salat, there are some additional rules that you need to be mindful of, in addition to the rules we've already discussed. Let's talk about some of these additional rules as they pertain to congregational Salat. It says, performing the obligatory Salats in congregation is a communal obligation. So I believe we've talked about this before. What is a communal obligation? You should know that the obligations are of two types. There are personal obligations and there are communal obligations. A personal obligation is an obligation that's upon you, like you individually. You have to do it. Okay, you need to perform this obligation, and if you don't do it, you're sinful. That's called a personal obligation. But then you have communal obligations. A communal obligation means your community has to do it. And if the community collectively fails to do it, then the community is collectively sinful. Okay, but it doesn't fall, this kind of obligation doesn't fall on individuals. It falls on the community. So as long as someone in the community does it, then the others in the community don't have to do it. This is called a communal obligation. It says here, performing the obligatory salats, talking about the 5 daily salats, in congregation is a communal obligation. What that means is that for every one of the 5 daily obligatory salats, they must be prayed in congregation in your town. In the place where you're living, all 5 of the salats must be prayed in congregation every single day. And I don't necessarily mean that there's one place in the town where these 5 salats are being prayed. No, these 5 salats need to be prayed in congregation in as many different places around town as is possible for Islam to be visible in that town. For Islam to be visible in the town. Okay, that's how long you need, that's how many places need to be performing the 5 obligatory salats in congregation every day. What this means is that if for any one of the salats, if any one salat is not being prayed in congregation in the necessary number of places around town, then all of the people that this communal obligation is upon, all of them will be sinful. Who exactly are the people that this communal obligation is upon? It says, performing the obligatory salats in congregation is a communal obligation upon males who are free, residing, pubescent, and unexcused. These are the people who have an obligation to pray the 5 daily salats in congregation. You should understand from this that women are not under this communal obligation. It means women do not have an obligation to pray in congregation. And if those who are obligated to do so fail to do so, the women will not be sinful. Only the ones that the communal obligation is upon, they are the ones who will be sinful if they fail to carry this out. So the communal obligation is upon males. That means women are not obligated to pray in congregation. Who are free. This means that slaves, even if they're male, are not obligated to pray the salats in congregation. Residing. This means that travelers in that town are not obligated to pray the salats in congregation. Pubescent. This means that prepubescent children, even if they're male and free and residing, they are not obligated to perform the salats in congregation. It says, and unexcused. So anyone with a religiously valid excuse for not praying in congregation, this person is not obligated to pray in congregation because he has a religiously valid excuse. These are the ones that must make sure that at Subh every morning, and at Dhuhr, and at Asr, and at Maghrib, and at Isha, that a group congregational salat is being held in however many places around that town are necessary for Islam to be visible in the town. It says there are additional rules for praying in congregation. So when you're going to pray in a group, there's some extra rules that you're going to have to follow. The first rule pertains to, like, if you're the follower, if you're the follower praying behind the Imam, there are certain cases when you're not going to be allowed to follow the Imam. What are those cases? It says, number one may not pray behind someone if he knows that the Imam's salat is invalid. So if you know that the Imam, the one leading the salat, if you know his salat is invalid, then you are not permitted to pray behind him. What's the case where you know the Imam's salat is invalid? It would be like if you saw the Imam, who's a man, shake hands with a woman outside the masjid. You saw him shake her hand, skin to skin touch. So you know his wudu is broken because you saw it with your own eyes. And then you saw him walk in the masjid and go right up in front of the group and lead the salat without ever making any wudu. In this case, you know the Imam's salat is invalid, and because of that, you may not pray behind him. What's another case where you cannot pray behind the Imam? It says if he believes that the Imam's Salat is invalid. In the first bullet, it said knows that the Salat is invalid. This time it says believes the Salat is invalid. Okay, this distinction matters to scholars of fiqh, because if you know something, then you can't possibly be wrong about it. That's why for the example of knowledge, I gave an example of something you see with your eyes. You saw him shake hands with the woman, so you know his wudu is broken. This bullet deals with belief. It's something that you don't know for sure is true, but it's something that you believe to be true. An example would be like, we talked about facing the Qibla before, and we mentioned that if you cannot see the Kaaba with your own eyes, nor is there someone nearby who sees it with his eyes who can tell you where to face, we said that you have to do something called ijtihad. You have to figure out to the best of your ability, using whichever evidence is available to you, you must figure out which direction to face, and then you must face that direction. Okay? So if you looked at the evidence and you decided that the Qibla is one direction, and then you find that this Imam is not facing the direction that you believe is the direction of the Qibla, then you cannot pray behind him. You cannot pray behind him. Okay? Even though you don't know for sure that you're the one that's right. It's possible the Imam is right and you're wrong. It's possible you're right and he's wrong. This is why we don't call it knowledge. We didn't say you know his salat is invalid. We said you believe it to be invalid. Because the ijtihad that you made based on evidence gave you a particular direction to face, and the Imam is not facing that direction. So in your heart, in your belief, the Imam is wrong. Even though you also recognize it's possible you could be wrong. But what you can't do is face a direction that you don't believe the Kaaba is in. That's something you cannot do. Third bullet, it says, believes that the Imam is obligated to repeat his salat. So there are certain cases when a person might be obligated to repeat the salat. Like he does the salat, but he might still have to repeat it. Okay, there are cases like that. Some cases, we talked about one such case last week, right? Someone asked about a person who is learning to recite the Fatiha and hasn't learned it yet. Okay, and we said that there's a certain amount of time during which he's allowed to make an accommodation. Okay, that's if he used all of his free time to learn the Fatiha. After that amount of time is over, okay, after the amount of time that would be required for him to learn the Fatiha properly, assuming he spent all of his free time studying it, after that point of time, if he still has not memorized the Fatiha, then it's because he has fallen short. It's because he didn't put forward his best effort. He didn't put all of his free time into it. That's why he didn't learn it by then. So after that point in time, what does he do? He continues to make accommodations in the Salat because he has no choice. He doesn't know the Fatiha. But once he learns the Fatiha properly, what will he have to do? He will have to repeat all of the prayers he prayed after the grace period was over. You'll have to repeat them. That's one example of an Imam that will have to repeat a Salat. What's another example? Tayammum. There are certain cases, not every case, but there are certain cases where the person who makes tayammum to make salat, that once he finds water and is able to make wudu, then he'll have to repeat the salats that he prayed with his tayammum. There are cases like that. We won't go into them now. But just know that if you believe, based on the madhab that you follow, that the Imam has an obligation to repeat this salat, then if you are someone that will not need to repeat the salat, you can't pray behind him. Next bullet. It says, if he is unsure if the person is the Imam or is following someone else. So if you walk into a building and you see Muslims praying and you're not sure who's the Imam, you see someone that looks like he might be the Imam, but then again, you think he might actually be following somebody else. You're not sure. Well, that uncertainty means you can't pray behind him. Okay, you need to know who's the Imam. You should understand from this, since it's haram for you to pray behind someone that you're unsure if he's the Imam, you should understand from that that it's definitely haram for you to pray behind someone that you know for sure is not the Imam. Okay, so if you know such and such a person is a follower, you cannot follow him in your salah. Next bullet. So if the Imam recites Al-Fatiha, if the follower recites Al-Fatiha properly, but the Imam does not. So if you recite Surah Al-Fatiha properly, and the person who's leading the Salat does not recite Surah Al-Fatiha properly, then it's not permissible for you to pray behind him. And the last bullet here, it says, if he is a male and the Imam is female. Okay, so if you are a male and the one leading the Salat is a female, then as a male, you cannot pray behind her. Okay, it's forbidden for men to pray behind women. So that's the first set of rules, or first things to know when it comes to praying in a group, that there are times when you're not going to be able to pray behind whoever that Imam is. These are the rules to help you know who are the ones you're not allowed to pray behind. Number 2, it says the follower must not stand in front of the Imam. Okay, so another special rule that comes into play when you're praying in a group is that if you're not the Imam, if you're the one praying behind him, you must physically be standing behind him. Okay, it is not valid if you are standing in front of the Imam. What do we mean when we say in front of the Imam? We mean you are closer to the Qibla than he is. You are closer to the Qibla than he is. In that case, your Salat will not be valid as a follower. In fact, let me get a little bit more specific. The Imam, when he's standing, there's a certain part of his body which is touching the ground. We're talking about the soles of his feet. The bottoms of his feet are touching the ground. And I'm sure if he had, wet feet and left a footprint, you would know what his footprint looks like. It has, the bottom of his toes are touching the ground. The balls of his feet are touching the ground. The outside edge of his foot touch the ground, but not the arch. And the heel of his foot touches the ground. These are the places that actually come into contact with the ground while he's standing. Whatever is the farthest back part, in this case, we're talking about the back of the heel, whatever is the farthest back away from the Qibla part of his body, which he is using to support himself. So when he's standing, he's using his feet to support himself, to carry his weight. Whatever is the farthest back away from the Qibla part of his body, that is considered to be where he's standing. So the Imam, the back of his heel is where he's standing. And you as a follower, the back of your heel is where you're standing. So when we say that you're not standing in front of the Imam, what we mean is the back of your heel is behind the back of his heel. We're saying the back of your heel is further away from the Qibla than the back of the Imam's heel. That's what we mean. So when you're praying in a group, your heel must always be behind the heel of the Imam. Even if your group is just 2 people. Everyone knows, or most people know, that when 2 Muslim men are praying, that they should stand side by side. Okay, you don't stand like one person a whole row back by himself. If they're just 2 people praying, you stand side by side. But when you stand side by side, still, even then, the Imam has to be in front. So even then, the follower, he moves back a little bit. He doesn't have to move back a lot, but he moves back a little bit, enough to make sure that the back of his heel is behind the back of the Imam's heel. And he's going to need to stay for the duration of the whole Salat further back than the Imam. What happens if they're equal? Okay, we said it's forbidden for the follower to be in front of the Imam. And we said rather the follower should be behind the Imam. But the question is, well, what if they're exactly equal? What if the back of the Imam's foot and the back of the follower's foot are lined up? In this case, this will not invalidate the Salat. Okay, in this case, the Salat will not be invalid. This is makruh. Right, the reward that the follower gets for the Salat will be impacted, but the Salat will still be valid. Let's go back. It says, the follower must not stand in front of the Imam, nor say the opening Allahu Akbar before the Imam does. So just like how you can't stand in front of the Imam, the follower also cannot say Allahu Akbar before the Imam does. So the Imam needs to start the Salat by saying Allahu Akbar. And, in case you don't know, I will tell you that the actual moment that the Salat starts is when he pronounces the letter Ra at the end of Akbar. That R at the end, Akbar. That sound is the start of the Salat. He says Allahu Akbar. That's when the Salat begins. So if the follower says the Ra of his takbir before the Imam says the Ra of his takbir, then the follower is sinful and his Salat did not even start. His Salat did not ever begin. So be careful. Sometimes the Imam stretches out his takbir. Have you ever seen one of these Imams? He gets up front, he says, Allahu Akbar. He stretches it out really long. And the follower, like after the Imam started saying all of that, the follower might have said Allahu Akbar and actually said the Ra before the Imam. If that happens, your Salat doesn't even begin. Your Salat does not start. You're going to have to wait till after the Imam says his Ra, and then you will repeat your takbir, inshallah. It says, if the follower says Allahu Akbar at the same time as the Imam, his Salat is invalid. So if both of you say that Ra at the same time, the follower's Salat is invalid, because the follower cannot say his opening takbir before the Imam or even at the same time. The Imam must say it first and the follower says it second. Keep in mind, we're only talking right now about the opening takbir, that Allahu Akbar, which starts the Salat. As for all of the other takbirs, they have a different ruling. Okay, they have a different ruling. It's disliked for the follower to say those takbirs before the Imam. It's not haram, and it will not invalidate the Salat. It says simultaneity with the Imam in other parts of the Salat is disliked, makruh, with the exception of saying Ameen. So aside from the opening takbir, the other parts of the Salat that you speak, it is not going to invalidate the Salat if you say them simultaneous with the Imam. So like the other takbirs, saying Sami Allahu liman hamida, saying Rabbana lakal hamd. For example, these things, if the follower says them at the same time as the Imam, it's makruh, it's disliked, but it's not haram and it does not invalidate the Salat. The exception to this rule is Ameen. When the Imam is finished reciting Al-Fatiha, the Imam will say Ameen. And for Ameen, it is not disliked for the follower to say Ameen at the same time as the Imam. In fact, it's rewardable. It's sunnah for the follower to say Ameen at the same time as the Imam. In fact, you want to try to make it exactly the same as the Imam. For the entire word Ameen, you want to try to make it exactly the same as the Imam, insha'Allah ta'ala. Number 3. It says it's haram for the follower to precede the Imam by one integral of action. So if the follower does an integral of action before the Imam, then this is haram. This is what? Haram. But it does not invalidate the salat. What's an example of the follower doing something, doing one integral of action before the Imam? It would be like this. Let's say you have the Imam here in front and the follower here behind. The Imam saying the Fatiha and a surah. The follower saying the Fatiha and a surah. The follower goes into ruku'. At this point, the follower has done part of one integral of action before the Imam. Okay? But let's say the follower comes out of ruku' and enters i'tidal. And the Imam still hasn't gone into ruku' at all. In this case, we say the follower has done one integral of action ahead of the Imam. Why? Because he started his ruku' and even ended it before the Imam started his. So that means he did a full and complete integral ahead of the Imam. If the follower does one full integral of action ahead of the Imam, this is haram, and he needs to repent from it. But it does not invalidate the salat, even if it's done intentionally. It says he invalidates his salat by inexcusably preceding the Imam by two consecutive integrals of action, at least one of which is long. So we said if he goes ahead of the Imam by one integral of action, it's haram, but it does not invalidate. What's the point at which it invalidates? If he goes ahead by two integrals of action. That's the point where his salat will be invalid, as long as one of those integrals of action is a long integral. Okay, so the long integrals are ruku' and sujood and qiyam. Okay, these are the long integrals. All right, the short integrals are like i'tidal and julus between the two, the sitting between the two sajdas. These are short integrals. Okay, so let's say the Imam is reciting Al-Fatiha and the surah, and the one praying behind him, he goes into ruku'. Then he comes out of ruku', thereby completing one long integral. And then he goes into sujood, thereby completing the short integral of i'tidal. As soon as he begins to go down into sujood, his salat is invalid, as if the Imam is still standing up and reciting. Why? Because when he started going into ruku', that was the beginning of one integral of action. When he started coming out of ruku', that was the end of one integral of action and the beginning of the second integral of action. When he started to go down from i'tidal, that was the end of his i'tidal. Okay, so his ruku' and i'tidal, which are two separate integrals of action, one of them was long. That's enough to invalidate his salat. Okay. It says, similarly, he invalidates his salat if he lags behind the Imam by two consecutive integrals of action without an excuse. So just like how going ahead of the Imam without an excuse by two integrals of action, just like how that breaks the salat, lagging behind the Imam by two integrals of action without an excuse will invalidate the salat. So again, let's say the Imam is reciting and the Imam goes into ruku' and comes out of ruku'. Then the Imam begins to go into sujood. He starts to bend down for sujood. That means he's completed ruku' and he's completed i'tidal. The Imam has gone ahead of you by two integrals of action. So unless you have an excuse for lagging behind so much, your salat will be invalid right then and there. I remind you though that if you recite slowly, then that's an excuse for lagging behind. Okay, it's a valid religious excuse to lag behind the Imam for purposes of completing Surah Al-Fatiha. It says, and by more than 3 long integrals of action despite an excuse. Okay, so what's the third case now that will invalidate the salat? The first case was going ahead by 2 integrals of action, one of which is long. The second case was falling behind by 2 integrals of action, one of which was long. In those 2 cases, we're talking about people who do not have an excuse. The third case is for the person who does have a religious excuse. If he falls behind by more than 3 long integrals of action, then his salat is invalid, even though he has an excuse. Okay, even if you have an excuse, you cannot fall behind by more than 3 long integrals. So how does that work? Let's say you recite Al-Fatiha slowly. The Imam begins saying Al-Fatiha, and you begin saying Al-Fatiha. The Imam goes into Ruku', and you're still saying Al-Fatiha. The Imam leaves Ruku' and enters I'tidal. That's 1 long integral that he's ahead now. But you're still saying Al-Fatiha. The Imam leaves I'tidal and goes into Sujood. But you're still saying Al-Fatiha. The Imam comes out of Sujood and begins to sit. This is now 2 long integrals that he's completed while you're still saying the Fatiha. Then after his sitting, he goes back into Sujood and you're still saying the Fatiha. Now, once he lifts his head up from that second sajda, at that point he has completed 3 long integrals of action. So if you are still reciting the Fatiha at that moment, when he lifts his head up off the ground, you must do one of 2 things. Or to be more precise, what you must do is stop whatever you're doing and agree with the Imam. You must stop whatever you're doing and do what the Imam is doing. That's what you have to do once he lifts his head up from that second sajda. So what that means is if the Imam is going to sit down after he comes out of that sajda, like say he's going to say the tahiyyat, then you must immediately interrupt your recitation of Al-Fatiha, which still is not yet complete, and you must sit down. And you must agree with the position the Imam is in. And since you interrupted that rak'ah, after the Imam salams out, you're going to have to get up and perform that rak'ah that you missed. Okay? That's what you do if the Imam, after he lifts his head from the second sajda, he's going to sit. But what if you're reciting the Fatiha and the Imam lifts his head from the second sajda, but you know he's going to stand up? Well, in this case, you don't need to move. You don't even have to stop saying the Fatiha. You can continue reciting the Fatiha from wherever you are. You're probably close to the end by now. You can continue saying the Fatiha, but in your intention, as soon as the Imam lifts his head up from that second sajda, it must be your intention that this Fatiha is now counting for the new rak'ah that the Imam is standing up to do. Okay? So in your intention, you are agreeing with him. He's standing up and you are in the same qiyam that he is in of the new rak'ah. And what you do, since you're slow reciting, is you in your intention, you make that whole recitation of Al-Fatiha that you're just now about to finish, you make it count for this new rak'ah. That way you can bow, you can go into ruku' with the Imam. And that whole rak'ah that you missed, again, you're going to have to, after the Imam salams out, you're going to have to get up and pray the rak'ah that you missed. Okay? That's how it works. Let's read. It says, for example, if the Imam completes his second prostration and either sits for the tashahhud or stands for the next rak'ah, but the follower is still reciting his Fatiha, then the follower must immediately agree with the position of the Imam. And once the Imam completes his salat, the follower must pray an additional rak'ah. But if the follower completes his Fatiha before then, meaning before the Imam lifts his head from the second sajda, if he finishes the Fatiha before that moment, then he simply continues according to his own sequence until he catches up to the Imam. All right, so in this example, the Imam did his recitation. He went into Ruku', he went into I'tidal, he went into the first sajda, he sat, he went into the second sajda, but before he lifted his head up, the one praying behind him who's slow at reciting, he finally finished his Fatiha. So what does he do? He goes into Ruku'. And then when the Imam picks up his head, he doesn't need to agree with the Imam because he's not ahead by three long integrals yet. Rather, the follower goes quickly. Because remember, in all these positions, he only needs to be still long enough for him to say Subhanallah. So he can catch up to the Imam, inshallah. He can catch up to the Imam, inshallah. Number 4. It says the follower must know the movements of his Imam. So another one of the special rules that applies if you're praying in a group is that if you're the follower, you have to know what the Imam is doing. Normally this occurs by seeing him. As the follower, you need to see the Imam so you can see what position he's in. You can see when he moves. I remind you, it is not an integral of Salat to say Allahu Akbar when you move. It is not an integral of Salat to say Sami Allahu liman hamida. So the Imam might not say it. Maybe he forgot. Maybe he said it quietly. Maybe he just doesn't want to say it. It's your job as the follower to be watching the Imam so that you know when he changes positions. Okay? It's your job to know his movements. Normally this happens by seeing the Imam, but it can happen also by hearing. Okay? If you hear the Imam saying Allahu Akbar or Sami Allahu liman hamida or whatever he's saying to indicate his movements, then that's enough for you to know his movements. Or if there's a muballigh, okay, do you know the muballigh? The muballigh, sometimes if there's like a large jama'ah, a large congregation with a lot of people praying, there'll be someone with a loud voice, maybe even with a microphone, who repeats what the Imam says. So when the Imam says, Allahu Akbar, the muballigh will say, Allahu Akbar. Now in the Shafi'i school, the muballigh actually is not supposed to repeat what the Imam says. The muballigh is supposed to say what the follower says. He's supposed to say what the follower says. So the Imam says, Allahu Akbar, and the muballigh will say, Allahu Akbar in a loud voice, not because he's repeating the Imam, but because he as a follower is supposed to say Allahu Akbar. Okay, and in the Shafi'i school, when the Imam says, Sami Allahu liman hamida, the follower is also supposed to say, Sami Allahu liman hamida. Okay, the Imam says, Sami Allahu liman hamida, and then says, Rabbana lakal hamd. The follower does the exact same thing. The follower says, Sami Allahu liman hamida, Rabbana lakal hamd. It's not like the other madhabs where the Imam is the only one who says, Sami Allahu liman hamida. In the Shafi'i school, everyone says it. Whether you're the Imam, whether you're the follower, or whether you're praying alone, everyone says it. Number 5, it says the follower must be in the same masjid as the Imam. So if two people are praying together, there's a distance limitation to how far away the one who's praying behind can be. So let's talk about these cases. It says the follower must be in the same masjid as the Imam. So if they're both in the same masjid, then there is no distance limitation. The only limitation is that the follower needs to know the movements of the Imam. So if there's a giant masjid where there's 500 yards between the Imam and the follower, but if the follower can see the Imam and can know the Imam's movements, then the fact that there's so much distance between them does not matter. It doesn't matter. Okay, because they're both in the same masjid. But if they're not in the same masjid, what does it say? It says the follower must be in the same masjid as the Imam or within 300 cubits. So if they're not both in the masjid, like for example, if they're both like if they're both in the field, or if one of them is in the masjid and one of them is out of the masjid, then the distance between the follower and the imam, like if they're both in the field, cannot be more than 300 cubits, approximately 300 cubits. We're not being precise when we say that. It's okay if you're 301 cubits or 302 cubits back. That's okay. But the distance limitation kicks in if they're not both within the masjid. So if they're both out in the field, then the follower must be within approximately 300 cubits of the imam. I remind you, a cubit is a distance from the tip of the middle finger to the elbow of an average-sized adult man. So they must be within a distance of 300 cubits. If the imam is inside the masjid and the follower is out of the masjid, then there must be no more than 300 cubits, approximately, between the follower and the wall of the masjid. Okay. Number 6, it says, when outside of a mosque, there must not be a barrier between the follower and the imam that prevents the follower from reaching the imam. So just like how there's a distance limitation when you're outside of the masjid, there is also a limitation that pertains to barriers. So if the imam is in the masjid and the follower is out of the masjid, it's a condition that there's no barrier that would block him from reaching the imam. Okay, it must be the case that that follower, if he wanted to walk to the imam, he could walk to the imam without ever turning away from the qibla. Okay, it means there's no wall between him and the imam. There's no closed door between him and the imam. There's no door situated in such a way that for him to walk through the door the way a normal person walks through a door. It's not the case that he'd have to turn away from the qibla to do that. Okay, these conditions are true if the follower is outside the masjid and the imam is inside the masjid. This is also true if both of them are outside the masjid. Then it must be the case that there's no barrier that would prevent the follower from reaching the imam without needing to turn away from the qibla. So if any of you are ever in Mecca, I'm sure some of you have seen those pictures of Mecca. They've now built very big hotels surrounding the Kaaba. One of you might get the urge, since you can see from the very high hotel window, you can see the people praying down at the Masjid al-Haram. You might get the urge to pray behind them. Since you can see the imam down there, you can see what he's doing. You might get the urge to try to join the jama'ah. Well, no, that would not be a valid jama'ah according to the Shafi'i school, because there's a barrier between you and the imam, which is, a window and a very long drop. So the fact that there's a barrier between you and the imam means you cannot follow him in a valid way. Number 7, it says the formats of the follower's salat and the imam's salat must agree. So in order for you as a follower to validly pray behind an imam, your salats must have the same format. What do I mean when I say they have the same format? I mean that a rak'ah is the same in the imam's salat as it is in your salat. That's what I mean. I'm not saying you have to be praying the exact same salat. It's valid for you. Like say you need to pray Dhuhr and the imam is praying Asr. It's valid for you to pray Dhuhr behind an imam that's praying Asr. It's valid for you to pray Asr behind an imam that's praying Dhuhr. It's valid for you to pray Maghrib behind an imam that's praying Asr. It's valid for you to pray Asr behind an imam that's praying Maghrib. It's valid for you to pray Subh behind an imam that's praying Isha. It's valid for you to pray Isha behind an imam that's praying Subh. Okay? It's not about the number of rak'ahs. It's not even about if it's an obligation or not. Okay, it's valid for you to pray a sunnah salat behind someone who's praying an obligatory salat. It's valid for you to pray an obligatory salat behind someone who's praying a sunnah salat. All of this is valid. We're not talking right now about whether it's disliked or not, but just it's valid. What matters is the formats of the salats are the same. The salat of the Imam has a format where you stand and then bow and then do i'tidal and then do a sujood and then sit and then do a sujood. The formats match. That's what matters. Let me tell you what's not permissible. All right, it's not permissible for you as a follower to pray dhuhr behind an Imam that's praying Janaza. Okay, the Janaza Salat or the funeral Salat does not have any ruku'as or sujoods in it. You stand the whole time. So the Janaza Salat has a different format than Asr or Dhuhr or the Sunnah Salats that we normally do. Because their formats are different, you cannot pray behind that Imam. Another example would be the eclipse Salat. Okay, if any of you have ever prayed the Sunnah Salat, the one that you pray if there's a solar eclipse or a lunar eclipse, you know that the format is different because each rak'ah, you recite the Fatiha and Quran, and then you do ruku', and then when you straighten up, you recite the Fatiha again, and you recite more Quran, and then you do another ruku'. And then you straighten up and you do your two sujoods like normal after that. So each rak'ah has an extra ruku' and an extra qiyam in it. So the format is different. So if you're doing the eclipse prayer and the one you're praying behind is just doing a regular obligatory salat, then you cannot pray behind that imam, or vice versa, because the formats do not match. Number 8, it says the follower must not disagree with his imam in a sunnah act in an enormous way. So there are some things that are sunnah. They're not obligations. You don't have to do them in the salat. Okay. An example is like the first tashahhud. When we talked about the integrals of salat, we mentioned that there are 17 integrals. And one of those integrals was that at the end of the salat, you sit and you say the tashahhud. You say the salat ala nabi, sallallahu alayhi wasallam. Okay? These things are also done sometimes in the middle of the salat. Like Asr, for example, after the second rak'ah, normally we sit and we say a tashahhud and we say a salat ala nabi, sallallahu alayhi wasallam, after the second rak'ah. Sitting and saying those things after the second rak'ah is not an obligation, because that is not one of the integrals of the salat. That is sunnah. It's recommended to do. It's not an obligation to do. The ones you do at the end of the salat, those are obligatory. Those are integrals. So, this is one example of something that's sunnah, but it's a major sunnah. Okay, if your imam decides to sit after the second rak'ah and to say the tashahhud, that's sunnah, and to say the salat ala nabi, sallallahu alayhi wasallam, that's sunnah, and you decide as a follower, you're just not going to do what the imam doing, you're going to stand up and start your third rak'ah, okay, in that case, your salat will be invalid. Why will your salat be invalid? Because you decided not to do a major sunnah. Like when I say major, I'm not talking about how emphasized the sunnah is. What I mean is, how obvious is it that you're not following the imam? That's what I mean by major here. If the imam sits down and sits there reciting for all that time, but you stood up and you sit saying the Fatiha or something, it'll be clear to anybody who's watching that you're not really following the imam. You disagreed with him in an obvious way. That's what we're talking about. Like if he sat down for the first tashahhud and you didn't, you chose to stand up, that will invalidate your salat because the imam did something that you decided to leave out. Or vice versa. Like if the imam decided to leave out that first tashahhud, the imam stood up right away for the third rak'ah, and you decide you're going to sit down and say the tashahhud anyway. Even in this case, you are disagreeing with the Imam in an obvious way, in a way that's clear to anybody watching that you're not following behind him. This will invalidate the Salat. Let's read what it says. It says, the follower must not disagree with his Imam in a Sunnah act in an enormous way. Disagreeing can occur by doing, meaning you did a Sunnah that the Imam did not do. Disagreeing can occur by doing it, like sitting for the first tashahhud, meaning when the Imam does not, or by not doing it, like sujood as-sahwi. There's certain cases when it's sunnah to pray two extra or to do two extra sajdas at the end of the salat. So if the Imam does two extra sajdas and you just decide you're not going to do them, then that will invalidate your salat because you disagreed with the Imam in an obvious and major way. Number 9, this is the last thing we'll do today, inshallah. It says the follower must have the intention to follow his Imam prior to following him and without a long wait. So it's also a condition that the follower, before he starts following someone, he must have the intention to follow that person. You should understand from this that you might not need to have the intention of following someone at the very beginning of your salat. For example, you might go into a masjid, start praying by yourself, and you knew there was some people over there making salat. I'll give you an example. Let's say you walk in the masjid. You see somebody over somewhere else making salat alone by himself. And so you decide to make salat alone by yourself. You're praying Asr. You don't know what that guy is praying. But then more people come in and they start praying with him. And you realize now that they're praying Asr, which is the same salat you're praying. You might, in the middle of your salat, make the intention to start following the Imam of that Jama'ah over there. You can do that. Okay? But you cannot actually start following him until after the intention is in your heart to follow him. Okay? If you start following him before you intended to follow him, then that would invalidate the salah. It says, and without a long wait. What's a long wait? Let's say that you go into, let's say the one leading the salat goes into sujood. And you don't have the intention of praying behind him. You just, happen to be going into sujood right after he goes into sujood. And you said, Subhana Rabbiyal A'la 3 times. And you're ready to come out of sujood. But that Imam over there, he still hasn't come out of sujood. So you decide you're just going to stay in sujood. And you just stay there. And you just stay there. And you just stay there. A long time passes of you not moving. All because what? You're waiting for the Imam to get up before you get up. Okay, if that happens, and you have not yet made the intention in your heart that you're going to follow that Imam, then your salat will be invalid. Okay, because if you actually follow the Imam, or even if you wait for a long time for the Imam to move, if you do either of those things without having the intention in your heart of following him, then it breaks your salat. What are we talking about here? The follower. Because the follower can make the intention to follow at any point in the salat, at the beginning or at the middle. But what matters is he doesn't actually follow until after the intention is there. Except for certain salats. Let's keep reading. It says, if the salat can only be done in congregation. See, a moment ago we were talking about Asr. It's valid to pray Asr alone. You don't have to do Asr in congregation. You can do it in congregation, but you can do it alone. However, there are some salats that can only be done in congregation. It's not possible for you to do them alone. It says, if the salat can only be done in congregation, like Jumu'ah or repeated salats. So Jumu'ah is a salat that's only done in congregation. So it's not possible for you to do Jumu'ah alone. So when you, as a follower, say your opening takbir to start your Jumu'ah salat, it must be part of your intention at that time. When you're saying the opening takbir, it must be part of your intention to follow the Imam. Because you cannot allow any portion of that salat to be without an intention of following. You can't even let one moment of the salat be without the intention of following. So the intention to follow must be present as you're saying the opening takbir. This is true for Jumu'ah because it can only be done in congregation. This is also true for other salats that can only be done in congregation, such as the repeated salat. Okay, imagine if one of you prayed, a salat by yourself, and then later you see a group praying the same salat. You can repeat that salat with the group so that you get more reward. This repeated salat, it's permissible because the repeated version was in a group. So you can only do it in a group. Even if your first salat was in a group and you repeated it now with a larger group, that's also permissible. But these repeated salats, they're only permissible in congregation. So you need to have the intention when you're saying the opening takbir that you're following the Imam. And these are just two examples. There are also other salats that can only be done in congregation. It says, if the salat can only be done in congregation, like Jumu'ah or repeated salats, then he must have the intention to follow the Imam while making the opening Allahu Akbar. It says, in these types of salats, talking about the ones that can only be done in congregation, in these types of salats, the Imam must also have the intention to lead during the opening Allahu Akbar. So if you're praying a salat that can only be done in congregation, then even the Imam must have the intention while he's saying the opening Allahu Akbar that he's going to lead the congregation. Because the Imam's salat also cannot have even one moment that is not with the intention of congregation. This is what if it's one of the salats that can only be done in congregation. As for normal salats that can be done in congregation or out of congregation, the Imam doesn't have to intend to lead. Okay, it's possible for a person to be praying alone and for there to be a whole group of people following him, a whole group of people behind him, praying behind him that he doesn't even know about. And I assure you it happens. There have been times when I've been in the masjid praying alone, and it was only when I salammed out that I realized there was a group of people praying behind me. Because sometimes if one person walks in, he stands next to you, so you know someone's praying behind you. But if a group of people walk in, they just line up behind you, you might not ever see them. So it happens. Okay, it happens sometimes that the Imam is leading, but he doesn't know he's leading. So he doesn't have the intention of leading. Okay, in that case, the Imam will not get the reward of praying in congregation because he didn't intend to pray in congregation. But the followers, as long as they had the intention to follow the Imam, then for them it's a congregational prayer and they'll be rewarded as such. Okay, this is how normal salats work. If the Imam knows he's leading and has the intention to lead, then it's a congregational salat for him. The followers, of course, know that they're following someone, so it's a congregational salat for them. But right here, we're talking about the salats that can only be done in congregation. So if it's like Jumu'ah, for example, if it's a salat that can only be done in congregation, then the Imam must have the intention to lead the salat when he says his opening Allahu Akbar. Okay, that's how it works. Otherwise, the salat will be invalid. It says the Imam must also have the intention to lead during the opening Allahu Akbar. But it is sunnah in other salats. So in the salats that can be done in congregation or not in congregation, in those salats, it's sunnah for the Imam to have the intention to lead. It is not an obligation. In the salats that can only be done in congregation, it is an obligation that the Imam intend to lead when he says his opening takbir. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. Next time, inshallah, we will pick up with the Jumu'ah Salat. Jumu'ah is a salat that it takes into account everything we've done so far. The conditions of salat must be observed. The integrals of salat must be observed. The invalidators of salat must be avoided. All of the rules of congregational salat must be applied. But then on top of all of that, there's some extra special rules that apply only to Jumu'ah. And we'll talk about them next week, inshallah ta'ala. Are there any questions? If you have questions, please ask. I know I've been a little long today, but alhamdulillah, we made more progress than usual. If anyone has a question, just type it in the box. One of the brothers says he has questions, so I'm waiting for him to type it out, inshallah. If a person forgot that he was in salat, okay, so if he forgot that he's in salat, ooh. Here's my recommendation for that case, brother. If a person was moving without realizing he's moving, and then he suddenly realizes and he stops in the salat, my advice to you would be to take the easier opinion that I mentioned earlier. As long as his extra movements were not consecutive, how do I put this? It will only invalidate the salat if his extra movements were consecutive and were consecutive for an amount of time equal, so long that he could do an entire rak'ah in that amount of time. I would advise the person to follow that opinion because most likely he did not do so many extra movements to invalidate his salat according to that opinion. Okay, if at any point he's still and breaks the consecutiveness of the actions, then it's as if the clock starts over. So it's quite difficult to invalidate your salat by that opinion. Someone asks, are prayers valid if the Imam is at the masjid and the people are at home watching the Imam on video? The answer to that is no. Okay, remember, if you are at home, if you are not in the masjid, there's a distance limitation. You must be within 300 cubits of the Imam. Furthermore, you need to know the Imam's movements by seeing him or hearing him. And in this case, you don't see him or hear him. All you see is a TV screen. Next question. If people join you and you didn't have the niyyah of an Imam, then are the followers' salats valid according to the Shafi'i madhab? Yes. As long as the follower did not follow the Imam until after he intended to follow the Imam, then yes, not only is their salat valid, it counts as a congregational salat. And I probably don't need to remind you that the one who prays in congregation, his reward is 25 or 27 times greater than the salat of a person who prays alone. And I think that's all of the questions for now. So if you have more questions, you can always ask next time, inshallah ta'ala. Let's close out. La ilaha illallah. La ilaha illallah. La ilaha illallah. Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallim. Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallim. Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallim. رب اغفر لي وللمؤمنين والمؤمنات رب اغفر لي وللمؤمنين والمؤمنات رب اغفر لي وللمؤمنين والمؤمنات. بارك الله فيكم. I'll see you next week at this time, inshallah ta'ala. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.